When James and Kimberly Williams moved to a quiet suburb in search of a better life for their daughter, they didn't expect their dream to turn into a nightmare. Their white neighbor, Mr. Bennett, turned every step they took into a battlefield, disrupting their peace with small but malicious acts, fueled by systemic racism and hatred. But when flower pots were smashed, trash was scattered across their yard, and the police merely shrugged, the Williams family decided they would stay silent no longer. What happened next shocked even those who had seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. James and Kimberly Williams, a young black couple, dreamed of a better future for their daughter, Layla. Years of hard work and modest living in the city allowed them to save up for a move to the suburbs, where Layla could grow up in peace and safety, and they could find stability. The house on the quiet street with neatly trimmed lawns and small gardens became the embodiment of their dream. But it soon became clear that the key figure in the neighborhood was Mr. Bennett, a homeowner whose family had lived there for generations. Mr. Bennett, a man over 60, always appeared in a suit, with impeccable manners. But behind that facade was a hidden aggression. When the Williamses moved in, they approached him to rent an apartment while they renovated their house. Kimberly explained that they needed a place for a couple of months, but Bennett refused, citing plumbing issues. His words seemed like an excuse not to rent to a black family. James struggled to contain his anger, understanding that this was a ploy. Kimberly tried to find a compromise, but Bennett remained cold. It was clear he expected them to give up. But the Williams family decided not to back down. They realized that in this neighborhood, they would face not only quiet streets, but also invisible social barriers. Kimberly walked away with her head held high, though inside she was filled with emotion. "We'll manage," she told James. "We'll prove that we have the right to live here." After purchasing their dream home, James and Kimberly Williams began setting up their new life, hoping to create a safe space for Layla. But soon they noticed disturbing signs that Mr. Bennett hadn't let go of his prejudices. Now, as their neighbor, his influence became even more palpable. Every step they took felt under his cold, watchful eyes. One evening, as James was mowing the lawn, a police car pulled up in front of their house. Bennett was gesturing toward the officers, and it became clear to James. This was no coincidence. The officer ordered him to stop his work, citing complaints about disturbing the peace, even though the sound of the lawnmower was perfectly normal. James complied, but inside his anger grew. This was the first instance of pressure from Bennett, but James knew it was only the beginning. James, usually calm and conflict-averse, realized that their dreams of a peaceful life were under threat. Kimberly, seeing her husband's concern, reassured him. "This is our home, and we will fight for our right to live here." James agreed with his wife. They couldn't give up, but they had to act legally and with dignity. When they filed a complaint with the authorities about the harassment, they were met with indifference. Bennett's neighbors, who had lived there for years, were afraid to get involved, viewing him as the neighborhood's guardian. But the Williamses knew their struggle would be long, and rather than retreat, they started seeking allies, hoping to draw attention to the injustice. As the Williams family tried to establish peaceful relations with Mr. Bennett, they increasingly felt his cold hostility. Every time James or Kimberly tried to greet him or start a conversation, Bennett either ignored them or waved them off with disdain, finding new reasons for discontent. Any attempts to build neighborly relations were met with a wall of aggression and new accusations. One morning, Kimberly discovered that the flower pots she had lovingly placed around their home had been smashed, and trash was scattered across their yard, clearly brought from outside. It felt like a slap in the face. They had tried to ignore the hostility, but now it seemed they were being deliberately provoked. James, worried for his family's safety, called the police, hoping that this incident would finally draw attention to their plight. But the officers who arrived simply shrugged. "This could be a coincidence," one of them said indifferently, glancing at the scattered trash. James felt helpless. Instead of protecting them, the system seemed to be shielding those who oppressed them. Neighbors, who had previously been friendly and welcoming, now avoided the Williamses. When Kimberly walked down the street, she noticed people quickly shutting their doors or pretending to be busy as she passed by. The sense of isolation grew stronger. The residents of the area, fearing they might become targets of Bennett's aggression, preferred not to intervene, leaving the Williamses to fight their battle alone. For Kimberly, this was especially painful. She wanted nothing more than to provide her daughter Layla with a safe and nurturing environment. Every time she saw Layla playing in the yard, she felt a pang of fear for her child's future in this neighborhood. Bennett's hostility cast a constant shadow over their family, and Kimberly felt she could no longer stand by. James also felt the pressure. Although his natural inclination toward peace and calm urged him to avoid open conflict, he began to question his strategy of silent resistance. It seemed that every concession only emboldened Bennett and his aggression. Seeing how it affected Kimberly and threatened their family, he realized it was time to take decisive action. Together, they reached out to lawyers and activists, exploring the possibility of filing an official complaint about racial discrimination. It was a difficult step for Kimberly, but she knew they couldn't allow this behavior to continue. James, despite his doubts, also understood that fighting for their rights was necessary. They began meeting with attorneys, discussing the possibility of lawsuits and legal measures to protect their family. They also attempted to garner support from other residents, organizing small meetings with those willing to hear their story. But even that was a challenging task. Fear of Bennett and social pressure made people reluctant to take part openly. Nonetheless, some neighbors started to question the fairness of the situation. For the Williams family, this struggle became not just about their right to live in this neighborhood, but part of a broader fight for equality. With each passing day, their resolve grew, even as new obstacles arose. Months into the struggle, it seemed like things were only getting worse for the Williams family. Tensions were rising, and no step seemed to bring results. However, help came from an unexpected source. Local activists, learning about the situation, offered the family legal and moral support. They helped connect them with journalists, and soon the Williams' story appeared in newspapers and on news websites. Stories about a black family being harassed by a white neighbor in the suburbs sparked widespread attention. Journalists focused not only on their personal experience, but also on how cases like these illustrated deeper issues of systemic discrimination in affluent suburban areas. The Williams' story revealed that even in the 21st century, racial biases remained a powerful force in the everyday lives of many families. Local residents, many of whom had remained silent out of fear of getting involved with Mr. Bennett, began to rethink their positions. Seeing how the media was covering the situation and how the public was expressing support for the Williams family, people started to realize that their inaction was enabling oppression. Gradually, a movement of support began to form around the family. At neighborhood gatherings, new faces appeared, and people signed petitions demanding action against Bennett's aggressive behavior. This wave of solidarity was surprising not only to the Williams family, but also to Bennett himself. To his surprise, Bennett found himself at the center of public scrutiny, which shook his confidence. In a community that had previously supported him implicitly, more and more people were now openly speaking out against his behavior. Eventually, public pressure and media coverage forced local authorities to take the Williams' complaints seriously. Legal proceedings began, with charges of racial discrimination and systematic harassment. The trial became the culmination of the entire struggle. During the hearings, the Williams' lawyers presented evidence of months of harassment, from false accusations to petty but constant acts of vandalism that made their lives unbearable. Kimberly and James testified before the court, sharing their experiences and the emotional toll they faced as they tried to protect their family. For Bennett, this was an unexpected blow. He likely hadn't anticipated that his actions would lead to such consequences. In the end, the court ruled that Bennett had to leave his home and sell it, as well as pay compensation to the Williams family for emotional and material damages. This was a historic moment for the neighborhood, one that many had thought would never change. When the court's decision took effect, James and Kimberly were finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. They had not only defended their right to live in the neighborhood, but they had become a symbol of the fight for justice. Now, they could live in their home and feel that their struggle had not been in vain. This experience taught them and their neighbors that silence and fear only perpetuate injustice, but determined action can change the course of events. The conclusion of this story brought not only personal satisfaction to the Williams family, but also opened the eyes of many residents to the reality of systemic discrimination that Black families face across the country. Their victory was an important step in the long fight for equality and justice, reminding everyone that change is possible if you fight for it.